Senator Tom Davis is in the studio today. Senator Davis, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
We're very glad to have you. So if you would, we've got a lot of content today. Tell us about the Energy Freedom Act, first of all, that you authored and was recently signed into law by Governor Henry McMaster.
Right. I mean, to understand the Energy Freedom Act, you have to understand, how energy production and distribution occurs in South Carolina. About 60 or 70 years ago, the legislature divided South Carolina up into 3 regions, and it gave each region a monopoly utility to produce power and to distribute and transmit power. And essentially what happens is those utilities expend capital, they build production, and then ratepayers pay a 10.5% return on that invested capital. I mean, that's the way, prices are set. What the Energy Freedom Act says is that if you're an independent power producer, if you can generate power more cheaply than a utility can, if you're wind or solar or biomass or anything at all, and if you can demonstrate to the Public Service Commission that you can generate power for less than the avoided cost of that utility, then you have a right to sell that power to the grid and then pass the savings on to consumers. And so the Energy Freedom Act is all about letting those independent power producers come forward and demonstrate that they can generate power more cheaply. And if they can, have the ability to sell that power to the grid, and ratepayers will see their bills go down. So the Energy Freedom Act is about opening up markets. It's about tearing down those monopolies that may have made sense 7 years ago, but don't make any sense today. So it was a great victory for consumers this year in South Carolina.
Certainly sounds like it. And speaking of achievements, tell us about the Legislative Achievement Awards you recently received from our state's nurse practitioners and physician's assistants.
Right. I mean, in regard to healthcare, obviously the outcomes in rural communities particularly are not good. There's access problems, there's pricing problems, there's coverage problems. And what I've been trying to do in order to make healthcare more affordable and more accessible is expand the number of providers. I mean, physicians are critical, they're important, and certain things can only be done by a physician. But what we've seen in recent years are these non-physician healthcare providers, like nurse practitioners and physician's assistants. They can do a lot of things. And what we're doing now is updating our laws to allow those non-physician healthcare providers to provide healthcare services up to their full scope of training and skill level. And so what that does is it increases the number of providers, particularly in rural communities, because physicians tend to congregate or locate in urban areas, and they don't get into rural areas. And so by expanding the scope of practice for nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, we increase the number of suppliers and we help have access in rural communities. And again, we're not talking about nurse practitioners and physician's assistants doing something they're not qualified or trained to do. What we're talking about is updating our laws so that they're commensurate with the training that those non-physician healthcare professionals get today. And so we got that done last year with the Nurse Practitioners Act. This year I followed that up with the Physician's Assistants Act. So it's all about trying to improve access to healthcare, and that was another big victory for us.
Absolutely. So switching gears for a moment here, and we're running a little bit out of time, but very curiously, now Beaufort County, of course, is big on infrastructure, as is the entire state, but Beaufort and Jasper counties in particular, that's a hot button issue for our locals. What is the status of the application? Now, there was a $125 million grant from the State Infrastructure Bank for the new Hilton Head bridges. Can you give us an update on that?
Sure. What we're talking about is replacing those 4 spans of bridges that connect Hilton Head with the mainland. And the estimated cost of that replacement project is about $240 million. $40 million of that has already been set aside by the Department of Transportation and put in the bank for that purpose. Another $80 million will be raised locally through the local option sales tax that the voters approved last November. So that gets you up to $120 million. The remaining $120 million is going to be through a grant given by the State Infrastructure Bank. And we put together a very strong application. The governor has already endorsed that particular application. The SIB board, the State Infrastructure Bank board, will meet later this year to determine whether or not the $120 million grant will be awarded. But that's what we're focusing on right now as a delegation, making sure we get that money in the bank so we have the $240 million we need to replace those bridges. And it's looking very good.
Terrific news. Senator Tom Davis, I'm sorry to say we are out of time, but thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be with you.
After the break, we're back with an update from Mayor Billy Hilton. Stay right there.